Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Today, we're going to continue to talk about real estate investing, specifically the different types of properties that you may want to invest in, who they'll attract, and also the advantages and disadvantages to all of them. So, let's dive in. Okay, so the first type that I want to talk about today is the detached single family homes. Okay, so the first advantage is that these are the easiest to sell and exchange for the most part, right? In general, the number of days until closing for these properties is less than for other property types, right? The number of days on the market is less overall because these are generally the types of homes that most people want. Now, that isn't true in every single area, but in most areas, for the most part, that is the case. So, definitely do your research about certain areas and make sure that that is true in the area before investing in something like this. Make sure that there is demand for a single detached family home, but oftentimes in a lot of areas, there is. There's also less advertising on average for detached single family homes, assuming you're not doing like a short term rental or using it as a vacation home, assuming you're trying to attract long term tenants. This is generally the best way of doing that because people who are living with their families, right, with young families, are not likely going to want to move every year. Now, of course, that could happen. A family could sign a 1 year lease and then decide they want to move out a year later or 2 years later or something like that. But oftentimes, they may want to stay for 5 years or 10 years, especially given their rent control advantages in choosing to stay in the same place for a long time on the tenant's end. We'll get to that later, but it does generally attract long term tenants. Going along with that, there aren't any regular cleaning staff necessary in general, right? If you have a short term rental, then oftentimes there's regular cleaning that needs to be done. Whereas if you have a very low turnover rate, if most people are staying for years and years, as long as when they got the place it was nice and clean, then you're good to go, right? They're in charge of cleaning, they're keeping their own space clean after that point and making sure that it's good to go. Whereas whenever we have like a shorter term rental, we have more responsibility in keeping it clean or things like that. There's also going to be no condo and HOA fees because single detached family homes. I'm not including condominiums in this, even though there are some detached condominiums. Those are not included here, and so you don't have to pay any condo or HOA fees, which is fantastic. Also, there's going to be overall less time spent managing the property because, of course, when something breaks or there's something that needs to be repaired, then it's going to take some time for that. But there's not going to be as much time spent advertising and doing showings and things like that. If the people there are happy being there and they don't want to move out and haven't indicated that they're going to move out anytime soon, then we're good to go. There's also more freedom to renovate before you have tenants in there or between tenants as well. Of course, generally, we want to keep renovations to a minimum, or in some cases, just not renovate at all if it's unnecessary to do so during when tenants are there. However, before tenants come in or between tenants, we have more freedom to do renovations to improve the property value if we wish to do so because we don't have the condo rules, right? We just have the rules that the general city or the general state or province or whatever it is has in place. We do have to stick to certain codes, but there's not going to be additional rules that the condo enforces as well because it's not a condo, right? It's a detached family house that you have more control over when it comes to making renovations between tenants or before your first tenants arrive. All right, so what are the disadvantages? Why might we not want to invest in this type of family home? Well, there's less ability to raise rents over time in most rent controlled areas, right? If people are staying there for a long, long time, then every year there's only a certain percentage, there's a certain limit that you're able to raise the rent, right? Even if the market value has gone far past that, maybe in terms of market value, a 6% increase would make the most sense. However, the law says you can only do a 3.5% increase each year. Right, so there's less ability to raise the rents. However, if you're having tenants every 2-3 years moving in and out of there, well, when a new tenant comes in general, how it works is you can then, just put it back to the market value at that point. Or if you're doing short term rentals on Airbnb, you could just at any point decide, okay, let's raise the price to this price, let's raise the price to that price. And anyone who hasn't already booked and hasn't already locked in their price for the next few weeks must pay the higher price if they would like to book the Airbnb or the Vrbo or bookings.com or whatever it is. In general, short-term rentals can kind of just in general, in most cases, can kind of go up without any notice. But when it comes to people who are staying in the same place for a long time, and it's not a vacation rental, it's their home where they're living, there's less ability to raise rents. There's also less profit than other types of homes for this reason, right? And so there's certain things like if you're renting a house out by the room, generally there's going to be more profit. There's also more work that goes into that, or same with vacation rentals, usually have more profits, things like that in general if you do them correctly. However, there is also less work. So it's kind of like with this, there's less work, but there are also going to be less profits. Part of that is also due to the rent control, right? And whereas if we have people coming in and out more often, we can always just keep our rents on par with whatever we can just kind of keep them on par with whatever the market value is at the time. Whereas we can't really do that if we're restricted by rent control. And then also there's more maintenance and repair costs than other home types, right? Because for example, with like a condominium, there are certain things sometimes that the condo will repair, right? For example, if you own a certain unit in an apartment building and you rent that out, there's certain repairs and maintenance costs that are not your responsibility. Now, of course, in that case, it's a trade-off, right? You'd have to pay the condo fees, but there's certain costs, like if the air conditioning breaks in the building, that's not your job to fix, right? That's the condominium that takes care of that, or other things like that the condominium may decide to take care of as well. Whereas with a single detached family home, well, if the air conditioner breaks, well, then your job to, assuming it's general wear and tear and that the tenants didn't do anything to actually actively break it, generally it's going to be your job to, go and fix it or hire someone to fix it. Or if it's, broken beyond repair, get a replacement or, figure something out so that the people there can have air conditioning, assuming it's hot weather outside, assuming you're not living in a very cold place where air conditioning doesn't really make sense. But I'm thinking of places with warm climates where air conditioning is definitely a must. All right, so that's detached single family homes. So this might be the thing for you if you're looking for something with less maintenance. It's a little bit easier, with more freedom to do certain things. However, if you don't mind putting a little bit of extra work to get more profit, then this might not be the type for you. So let's move on to townhouses. So, what are some advantages to choosing to invest in a townhouse? Well, townhouses have less maintenance and repair costs, right? And that's because of the condo fees, right? You pay the condo fees, and because of that, certain repair and maintenance costs are covered for you. They're also more affordable than detached homes as well. And so, if you don't have as much money to put to a down payment, or you're not able to get the financing for a detached home, but you can for a townhouse, then that could be an option. A lot of people's starter homes are townhouses because they do cost less money. And so, they're the better option that makes more sense for a lot of people when they're just starting out and maybe they don't have enough money to invest in, a full fledged single family detached home. Also, they generally do have a higher rental income to cost ratio as well, which is good. However, keep in mind in terms of monthly bills that you have to factor HOA fees in there as well. The other thing is that some amenities may be included for tenants. And so, for example, if the HOA fees cover a pool, that's something you could advertise of, oh, hey, if you move here, then you'll have access to the community pool. You'll have access to this and that. And that could add value for tenants as well and cause them to be willing to pay more money because they recognize the value in those amenities, right? Maybe some of their utilities are included, maybe their internet's included, whatever it might be. Make sure you're aware of what is included before even going and buying it. And once you do have it, to advertise those things to really show the value that they're getting by choosing your townhouse. They're also more likely to be newer than detached homes, right? Townhouses are a relatively a more new thing, right? Since we have more and more people coming into this world, and therefore we need more and more housing than we needed previously. They are more likely to be newer, which is nice for sure for a lot of people. So why would we maybe not want to choose a townhouse? Well, condo and HOA fees are an extra cost that you wouldn't have, and even though they do cover certain things, there are definitely situations in which those extra amenities aren't always worth it. So it's always good to do a cost benefit analysis of looking at those condo fees and how much they're going to save you, and are they going to bring in extra revenue for you because you're paying those fees? Are they going to bring in extra revenue for you as the owner of the place, as the landlord? In terms of how much tenants are willing to pay to have certain amenities, right? So we have to kind of do that cost benefit comparison, because sometimes, even with everything that the condo and HOA fees are covering, it's still not worth it. And sometimes it is worth it. It just kind of depends, right? We have to do that cost benefit analysis and look at what would our target market care about, what will they pay extra for that's included in those fees, how much extra will they pay, and also how much are we saving by paying these fees in terms of maintenance and repair costs as well on average too. So we have to think about that. The next one is that the condo corporation might have extra renovation rules or restrictions that are separate from the cities. So that's something to keep in mind as well, is that there may be extra steps you have to do if you want to make renovations in a townhouse. And part of that has to do with the condo making rules. Part of that also has to do with the fact that you're sharing walls with the neighbors. So, of course, anything that disturbs the neighbors, probably not so good. Although this would also apply to a semi-detached, right? I'm sure in a semi you couldn't just do something that would interfere with the neighbor's wall, so they don't have a wall anymore. That's also probably not not going to work. Also, the condo corporation might have other rules that might discourage certain tenants. So, for example, let's say the condo has a rule that you're not allowed to have pets. Well, then any potential tenant who does have pets is probably just going to look elsewhere, right? So that's an example. Now, sometimes it works the opposite way, though, right? Sometimes the condo has rules that because everyone else has to follow the rules, people are happy to go with and happy to follow. So it can go the other way as well. I think for me personally, I would prefer to have less rules and less restrictions in terms of where I'm living. However, there are people who wouldn't, don't really see eye to eye with me on that and may decide, you know what, no, I'd rather have certain rules in place so that other people also can't do certain things that I wouldn't want them to do and that I wouldn't want to do anyway. So that's also something to keep in mind. The other disadvantage of having certain rules and restrictions in place there is that they might restrict certain types of rentals that you might want to do. So, for example, they might say you're not allowed to do Airbnb, or you're not allowed to rent out a room. It has to be you rent out the whole townhouse to a certain family, or you don't rent it at all. There's things like that. So there could be certain restrictions that restrict you as the person who owns the townhouse from doing what you would like to do. So definitely make sure to look into that and make sure that those rules are not going to cause bad things. For me personally, I would not recommend. It depends. It depends on you, but I personally would not choose to invest in a townhouse for those reasons. But that said, it could be a good investment and something that makes sense for certain people. All right, let's talk about the next one, which is apartment units in a building. So these are more common in places like Toronto, places like New York City, places like that, where they don't really have as many detached homes. There are also some places, like some more remote places, that still do have these, but just have a lot less of them. So the advantages that they are quite a bit less expensive in terms of the purchase price than the detached and the townhouses, so that's good. They are often as well in desirable locations. I was mentioning places like Toronto and New York, right? And why would they be in desirable places? Well, this is a way for not a lot of land to be taken up, but for a lot of people to be able to live in a certain place, and so they're much more likely to be built in a desirable location, right? Whereas if we have the same amount of land in a less desirable location where less people are looking, we might be more likely to build townhouses or detached houses to make sure that all of them actually get sold. Also, in apartment buildings, sometimes there's amenities included. So there might be a pool in the building or a gym or something like that that you can advertise to prospective tenants that they will be able to have access to. Maybe there's a communal barbecue, maybe there's a party room, anything like that, is good. Also, they're more likely to be newer than detached homes as well. More apartment buildings, are being built. They're a more new thing. And so they're likely to be newer, and there's also less maintenance and repairs, right? Because sometimes there's certain maintenance and repair issues that are not your responsibility, that the tenant would talk to the building manager about, or if the tenant does bring it up to you, maybe you email the building manager and let them know about a problem going on or something like that. But either way, there's certain maintenance issues that really aren't your responsibility if you own an apartment unit in a building, whether you live there or whether you're the landlord there. So, what about the disadvantages? Well, with apartment buildings, there are pretty pricey condo and HOA fees, which are an extra cost. So, again, just like with townhouses, we kind of have to do that cost benefit analysis of, does it make sense to pay these extra fees for what I will be getting in return, either in revenue that's going to help cover those costs, or in money that I will save in the long run. So that's something to keep in mind. Also, condo corporations, they might have extra rules and restrictions when it comes to renovations, much like townhouses. Also, those rules might discourage certain tenants, and also those rules may restrict you from renting it out in the way that you see fit. Also, too, another thing I didn't put in here, but there oftentimes are in bigger cities, which can have their benefits, but also their drawbacks, because on average, the bigger cities are going to have more city rules as well in terms of what you are and aren't allowed to do. There's certain cities where maybe you have to register every single thing with the city, versus maybe some smaller cities where that's not really required. It's not a requirement that the city has you do. So that may be a big thing that you don't want to have to deal with, or it might be something you're okay with. That just depends. There's also less appreciation on average, because keep in mind that if you own an apartment unit, you don't actually own land. You own that unit in the apartment, but you don't actually own the land as well. And so just the apartment is appreciating in value, but not actually the land. Whereas if you own a detached place, well, there's two parts of value to that. Partly it's that you own the land that is surrounding that detached home, but you also own the actual home itself, right? So for example, let's say you tore down your home and built a new one, or you just tore down your home. Well, you probably wouldn't want to do that, but you would still own the land, right? You would still own that plot of land where the house used to be, right? However many acres that would happen to be. With an apartment unit, it wouldn't be the same. So there is less appreciation on average in apartment units than there are in like detached or places where you own land as well. And they also, depending on the situation, they can be harder to sell, especially if there's townhouses or detached that are similar prices at a certain point. It could be harder to sell. Or also, if they're just a less popular type of unit in a particular area, they can be harder to sell than other types of places. All right, now let's talk about multifamily units. And personally, this is my favorite one. However, I do not have a multifamily unit because they can be harder to actually get and actually do. So let's talk about them. So, what are the advantages? Well, often they have a lower startup cost per unit, right? So, if you get a multifamily unit that, for example, maybe you get like a triplex, right, where there's three identical units in the same place, basically three identical units, you own all three of these units. And so it's going to be a lower startup cost per unit. If someone was to sell one unit of that, it would likely be for more than just one third, right? Because you're buying a lot more, you get kind of a discount oftentimes. There's also more financing options for multifamily units. It's less of a risk as well in a lot of cases to the banks. There's also a higher rental income cash flow opportunity, which is fantastic, right? And so you can rent out every single unit and get a certain amount. Or even, let's say you have like a regular detached house that has 5 bedrooms or 6 bedrooms or something like that, and you rent out it by the bedroom, right? That's going to likely get you more money, more income than if you just rented it out, overall a certain price for the house. It likely wouldn't go for that price otherwise, unless you do it on a per room basis, right? And so there is generally a higher rental income cash flow to the cost on average. Now, again, make sure that you do look up rents. Make sure you look up what are other similar things renting for, to make sure that you really will get what you're expecting to get in terms of rent. And also, too, these are really good for a long term investment, right? Eventually, when you do sell these, then you'll have 3 units, not just one, that have gone up in value substantially. And so it's really great for long term investments, that's for sure. They're not as good for short term investments, though, because they can be harder to sell. So what are the disadvantages? Well, they're going to be higher startup costs. So even though they have a lower startup cost per unit on a per unit basis, it's still going to cost more overall to get like a triplex or a duplex than just a single place, right? Less per unit, yes, but still a higher startup cost overall. And if you're someone who has that capital, then fantastic, but not everyone has that capital. So it's not an option for as many people. Also, more frequent advertising and property managing is going to be required because when you have a multifamily unit, when any one of those families says, "Oh, we're going to give our 60 days notice or our 30 days notice or however much notice they need to give, that we're going to move out," when any of those the three parties who are in any of those three units has that happen, well, we're going to have to advertise, right? There's also going to be more property managing as well, because if anything happens in any of those units, then of course we've got to take care of it, right? It's not just one unit, it's multiple units that we're having to take care of. So for that reason, there's also more expenses overall as well and more maintenance, especially too if every unit has a separate washer dryer, every unit has a separate air conditioner, separate roof, separate furnace, all that kind of stuff. When any one of those things breaks or needs repairs, we've got to do it. And so there are going to be more maintenance and repair expenses overall as well. Can also be more risk location wise because they are all in the same area. And they can also have more regulations depending. Now, that's not always the case. Sometimes multifamily units don't have regulations, but they can have more regulations in some cases. So definitely something to keep in mind. And also, too, there might be certain city regulations as well, depending on what city it's in, that are going to affect multifamily units more so than just single family units. So definitely something to keep in mind as well. I do think that if you do this the right way, this can be a fantastic investment, but I also recognize that the higher startup costs can be a big discouraging thing and disadvantage for a lot of people, along with more maintenance and overall expenses can be a discouraging thing as well. Okay, now let's talk about the last one, which is shared accommodation. So let's say you're renting out bedrooms in a detached semi or townhouse. So this would often be like if you have a student rental or something like that. A lot of times students would prefer shared accommodation because it costs a lot less money to just rent out a bedroom in a semi, a townhouse, or a detached house than it would cost to rent out an apartment. And if it really cost the same amount to rent out a room in a house as opposed to renting your whole an apartment, then nobody would rent out rooms, right? Everyone would just rent out the a full apartment at the same price, and so that's why they're always going to have to be less to cost a lot less. Because if they did not, people wouldn't go for them. So, what are some advantages of something like this? Well, the income is largely based on the number of bedrooms or bathrooms, because in terms of what do students in shared accommodation really value? Well, they value having their own bedroom, they value having their own bathroom, but in terms of how much like extra living space there is that's shared, they don't really value that as much, right? As long as there is a kitchen, as long as there are laundry facilities, as long as there is some living room, it's having two different living rooms is probably not going to cause a student renter or someone who's looking for a shared accommodation to decide that that's worth paying more income for, right? So there's certain things that people are going to be willing to pay more for, like if there's an extra bedroom, for example, then that's going to be something that's going to come along with extra income. If there's an extra bathroom and more units in shared accommodation get their private bathroom, fantastic. But there's not really a lot of other things that are going to matter enough to people that they're going to decide to pursue that option, right? So there might be a certain price for bedrooms that don't have a private bathroom that have a shared one, and then a higher price for bedrooms that do have a private bathroom. But even units, that do have a private bathroom still wouldn't be able to cost as much as like a full-on apartment, because a full-on apartment, you also get your own kitchen, you also get your own living room and things like that. Perhaps they're smaller, but they're still your own. There's also more control over rent prices because if it's shared accommodation, most people are not planning to stay in shared accommodation long term. Now, some people might, it's not that they can't. However, in general, in practice, they typically won't. And so, because of that, whenever somebody moves out, then you can then put the rent price to whatever rent price you wish to do so for. right? So in practice, most people who are staying in shared accommodation stay there anywhere from 4 months for maybe a 4 month work term that a student may have to probably maximum that a student might stay might be 3 to 4 years. Even then, that's pretty rare because oftentimes you'll get students who are just doing a program that's 1 year or 2 years who are staying there. So they're going to stay there for 1 or 2 years. Other times you might get students who they're doing a 4 year program, but they've already completed a year or 2 years or something like that. That kind of thing. Also, oftentimes students will just want the 8 months, and then they'll leave, and someone else will move in for the summer, and then someone else will move back in after, or things like that. And so there's more control over the rent prices because even with rent control generally doesn't apply to new tenants. It just applies to tenants who are previously there in terms of how much percentage wise the rent is allowed to be raised every year. And because you're renting it out by the bedroom, assuming you do this right and you prioritize a place that has more bedrooms, even if it has less other like shared spaces and things like that, you're going to get a higher rental income overall than you would. For example, I do have a student rental myself, and I know for sure that the amount of money that is coming in is more than it would be if I decided, okay, I'm not going to rent to students anymore. I'm going to rent the same place out to a family. There is no way a family would pay the same price for it that all of the students together are paying for it. Now, what about the disadvantages to something like this? Oftentimes, there's more property management overall, including more frequent advertising, right? Because anytime any of the 6 people or 5 people or however many people there are sharing the space, anytime any one of them decides, okay, I'm done, it's time for me to move out, then that's advertising, that's maintenance. It's also more cleaning because when people do move in and out, we want to clean spaces, we want to clean common areas, we want to clean the bedroom so that the new person coming in has a nice clean bedroom, that kind of thing. And so there's certain times where we would want to do more frequent cleaning in shared accommodation as opposed to other places. So cleaning may be something that's more commonly done that we either have to outsource or go in and do ourselves. So there is definitely more work and management time. That said, a lot of people would look at this and say, well, that's absolutely worth it to me because the higher rental income more than makes up for the fact that there are going to be some more advertising, some more maintenance, more cleaning, stuff like that. I personally would say that if you do this right, it absolutely is worth it, for sure. However, not everyone would agree. Some people would prefer something that's a bit more hands off, where there's less involvement there as well. So it just depends. But there we have it. Those are the advantages and disadvantages to the different types of places that you may want to invest in. And yeah, I will see everyone for our very last lecture in real estate investing. Good work today, everyone, and bye for now.